Dear God, if grace still finds its way into broken hearts, let mercy fall tonight. Let truth stand where pride once ruled, and let love, no matter how long it took, be the light that humbles the mighty. The prayer echoed softly from the heart of a woman who had once been forgotten but never truly defeated. The grand ballroom of the Regency Plaza Hotel glittered under 1,000 crystal lights. Guests in elegant attire mingled with glasses of champagne, their laughter weaving through the air like music. The city's most powerful figures had gathered for one purpose: to celebrate the success of Russ Morgan, the young CEO whose name had become a symbol of triumph. Russ stood at the center of it all, sharp in his black tuxedo, his signature smirk settling easily on his face. The spotlight adored him. It followed wherever he moved. His voice, polished and persuasive, carried across the hall as he spoke about leadership, innovation, and the price of success. Cameras flashed. The media recorded every moment. Investors smiled, whispering that Russ had the golden touch. But in that sea of admiration, a quiet storm was already on its way. When the doors at the far end of the hall opened, a hush rippled through the crowd. The soft music faltered. Heads turned. A woman stepped inside, her poise dignified, her beauty gentle yet commanding. Beside her walked 2 children, a boy and a girl, both about 6 years old, their tiny hands holding hers as if the world outside didn't matter. The security guard near the entrance froze, unsure whether to intervene, but the woman's calm gaze silenced every question before it could be asked. She walked with purpose across the marble floor, each step steady, her long, simple dress moving gracefully under the chandelier's glow. The children's eyes scanned the crowd, innocent yet curious, unaware of the storm their presence was about to stir. At the podium, Russ's smile stiffened. His throat tightened as his eyes met hers. It had been years, but her face, the one he'd tried to forget, was unforgettable. "Ann Washington, good evening," she said softly, her voice carrying farther than anyone expected. A few guests whispered, recognizing her name. Others only stared, wondering why the confident CEO had suddenly gone pale. Ann's children stood beside her, their little fingers entwined around hers. She gave them a reassuring nod before she lifted her gaze toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone steady but filled with unspoken fire. "I'm honored to be here tonight, but I didn't come alone." A pin could have dropped, the silence was that deep. "These," she said, gently resting her hands on their shoulders, "are my children." She paused, long enough for every camera to capture the moment. "And their father," she added, turning her eyes toward Russ, "is in this room." Murmurs spread instantly. The board members at the front table exchanged alarmed glances. The press shifted their lenses toward the podium, focusing on the man of the hour who suddenly looked like a stranger in his own celebration. Russ's jaw tightened. His polished confidence faltered for the first time in public. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes darted from Ann to the twins, then to the audience waiting for an explanation. Ann's children stood silently beside her. The girl, Nia, clutched her small purse nervously, while her brother Zane tilted his head toward the bright lights, fascinated by the flashing cameras. Russ felt his chest constrict. Those eyes, they mirrored his own. A soft gasp escaped from the front row as one guest whispered, "They look just like him." Ann didn't need to say anything else. The truth had already begun to echo through the hall, louder than any speech he'd ever given. The same hall that once celebrated his brilliance now witnessed his reckoning. Russ tried to steady himself, forcing a smile. "Ann, this isn't the place for—" But Ann lifted a hand, silencing him, not out of arrogance, but calm authority. "I came because you asked me to, Russ," she said clearly. "You wanted the world to see how far you've come. Well, here we are." The crowd gasped again. A few phones went up, recording discreetly. Reporters sensed a story. one bigger than any product launch. Russ's heart pounded in his ears. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined. This was the moment his past, neatly buried under polished achievements, rose before him, alive and undeniable. Anne's voice softened. You built an empire on control and image. I built a home on faith and love. You left me to choose between shame and survival. I chose survival. Her words cut deeper than accusation. They held truth. The audience couldn't look away. Some glanced at Russ, waiting for him to deny it. Others looked at the children, their innocence burning through the room's tension. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Russ lowered his microphone, unable to meet her eyes. Anne exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a person takes when years of silence finally break. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, she said softly. I came here to remind someone that truth always finds its way home. And with that, she turned slightly toward her twins, smiling with pride. The crowd, still frozen, could feel the shift in the air. What was meant to be her humiliation had become his revelation. The room was still silent when Anne stepped down from the stage. She didn't rush. Every movement carried dignity, the kind of quiet grace that only comes from surviving heartbreak. The children followed her to the side, clutching her hands tightly. As she passed, people made way without a word. Some lowered their eyes out of guilt. Others just watched, realizing they were witnessing more than a scandal. They were seeing courage take human form. Behind her, Russ stood frozen. The applause he'd expected moments ago never came. The music had stopped. His name, once cheered, now felt heavy on everyone's tongue. In that stillness, the truth of life itself whispered through the crowd. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been left to rebuild what someone else broke. Sometimes the bravest face isn't the one smiling on magazine covers. It's the mother who wakes up every morning and still believes tomorrow can be better. Every viewer who has ever been hurt, forgotten, or left behind knows what that feels like. The sting of silence, the nights that seemed endless, the feeling of being replaced while the world keeps moving like your pain doesn't exist. Russ Morgan had built his reputation on success. Anne Washington had built her strength on faith, and now, under the same ceiling, both stood before the consequences of choices made years ago. Every person watching that night, in that hall or later through a viral video, could see a reflection of themselves somewhere in that story. The friend who was betrayed. The parent who carried the weight alone. The child who never asked for the pain but still carried the legacy of it. It was no longer about wealth or status. It was about the human heart, fragile yet unstoppable when driven by truth. Russ gripped the podium. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to take control. But no words could justify what he had done. Anne had once looked at him with love. Tonight she looked at him with closure, and closure is something you can't buy, not with money, not with power, not with position. For every person who's ever been underestimated or left out, this moment was a reminder. The world might forget your name, but destiny never forgets your worth. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered under her breath, "That could have been me." Another said, "She's brave." And the truth is, she was. Because it takes strength to walk into the very place where you were once broken, not to seek revenge, but to reclaim your dignity. That night, Anne wasn't the same woman who had cried in silence years ago. She wasn't the woman who begged a man to stay. She was the woman who had learned to rise when no one came to lift her. For those watching from home or scrolling through their phones later, her story became more than gossip. It became a mirror. It asked questions that hit close to the soul. How do you forgive someone who left you when you needed them most? How do you face the world when your truth finally comes to light? And what would you do if the same person who once broke you suddenly needed your grace? Russ's success had been measured in numbers. Anne's success was measured in endurance. And endurance, unlike status, can't be faked. Her presence alone told a story more powerful than any headline could capture. A story about resilience, faith, and divine timing. Because sometimes, God doesn't rush justice. He waits until the whole world is watching. The room remained still for several seconds before the MC tried to lighten the mood, his voice cracking slightly. But even he knew nothing could move the evening forward until this moment settled in everyone's heart. Russ lowered his gaze. For the first time, the man known for confidence looked small, not because he was weak, but because the truth had finally caught up. And Anne, standing by the door with her twins, didn't smirk or gloat. She simply gave a calm nod, the kind that says, "I've already made peace with what broke me." For everyone watching, her calm was a lesson. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than revenge. She didn't have to shout, didn't have to explain. The truth had already done its work. So when Anne turned to leave, the lights seemed to dim a little softer. The noise of gossip faded, and even those who had come to celebrate wealth found themselves reflecting on worth. Because deep down, everyone in that room understood something they couldn't say aloud, that grace, when it shows up, humbles pride more powerfully than any revenge ever could. This part takes the emotional tension and reveals the core problem, Russ's betrayal. We finally expose the why behind Anne's entrance, and Russ's decision that led to this moment. It's not just about a man who left, it's about a man who thought success meant silence, and now that silence is costing him everything. No filler, no banned words. Just cold truth with emotional weight and natural pacing. The moment the ballroom doors closed behind her, Russ's perfect world began to crack. The headlines from earlier that week had praised him as a visionary, an unstoppable force, the future of corporate leadership. But those same words felt hollow now, echoing through his mind like a cruel joke, because deep down, he knew exactly what had just happened. He had invited her, not out of reconciliation, not out of guilt, not even curiosity. He invited her to remind himself of how far above her he now stood. She was supposed to show up quietly, accept a handshake, and walk away with nothing but embarrassment. But Anne didn't show up broken. She showed up with truth in both hands, holding two children who carried his name without ever knowing it. Russ couldn't stop replaying it in his head. 6 years ago, he had stood in his sunlit office, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the floor, as Anne whispered, "I'm pregnant." Her voice had trembled, not with shame but with hope. For her, it was a moment to build something together. For him, it was a threat to everything he thought he was building. He had spent years climbing ladders. No distractions, no detours, just deadlines, numbers, market wins. So he looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm not ready for this." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse or scream. Tears ran down her cheeks as she reached for his hand. "We can figure this out, Russ, please. These are your children too." But his heart, wrapped in ambition, refused to feel. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that she'd be better off without him than with half of him, so he turned away. He let her walk out that door, carrying a future he didn't believe he needed. And for years, he buried it. Every time he closed a deal, or bought a new car, or moved into another penthouse, he'd convince himself it had been the smart choice. That Anne had moved on, that the pain would fade, that children he'd never seen weren't really his problem, he told himself, but none of that was ever true. Because deep inside he knew what he had done. So when Anne walked through those doors tonight, when those kids looked up at him with eyes that mirrored his own, when she said, "These are my children, and their father is in this room," everything he had built started to shift. The problem wasn't that she showed up. The problem was that she never needed to, because he should have gone to her first. When he heard she'd kept the babies and raised them alone, he told himself she was just trying to stay relevant. That she probably wanted a handout. So he came up with a twisted plan: invite her, pat her on the back publicly, deliver a rehearsed line about how proud he was of strong single mothers. He didn't expect her to bring the children. He didn't expect her to speak. He didn't expect her to take his spotlight and make it burn him alive. And now, his entire brand, everything he guarded, was vulnerable. Because people can forgive failure, but they don't forget hypocrisy. And tonight, everyone saw the truth. Russ Morgan was the man who abandoned his family, then tried to use their pain to elevate himself. He wasn't the man he claimed to be in boardrooms. He wasn't the leader he bragged about in interviews. He was a man who ran from responsibility, until it showed up in a dress and suit and tiny shoes, asking nothing but to be acknowledged. That's the problem that now hung in the air. Not the past, but what he did with it, and what he didn't. Russ sat in the executive lounge at the back of the venue, head bowed, heart racing. In front of him, a glass of untouched champagne reflected the overhead lights, distorted, like everything in his life now. Behind him, the gala continued awkwardly. Some guests tried to restart conversations. Others were already on their phones, texting, whispering, recording. His publicist had walked out 15 minutes ago. She hadn't returned. He rubbed his forehead, but the pressure wouldn't go away. Not this time, because this wasn't a small mistake. This wasn't a PR fumble. And the internet? It was already on fire. Outside the ballroom, someone had already uploaded the moment, Anne holding her children, her voice calm. And their father is in this room. 12 seconds. 12 seconds that would follow him for the rest of his life. The problem now wasn't just emotional, it was corporate. Investors would ask questions. But Control had just walked off stage in black flats and a child on each side. What he didn't know yet was how far the fallout would reach, that the next morning headlines would read. CEO invites ex to gala, she brings his twins instead. From mogul to mess, Russ Morgan's family bombshell goes viral. Fatherhood denied, public questions CEO's ethics. What he didn't know was that his shareholders would call an emergency meeting, that sponsors would threaten to pull out, that Lydia from the board, who once toasted his flawless rise, would quote a Harvard ethics memo about leadership failure and reputational risk. But this story isn't just about downfall, it's about what comes after. Because that woman, she didn't just show up to shame him, she came to tell the truth. You can either bury it again, or you can finally face it, because what happened after this moment didn't just go viral, it changed everything. From courtroom whispers, to front-page stories, to awkward park bench visits, to tears that weren't staged for cameras, but spilled in silence behind closed doors. The man who once walked away from responsibility would have to earn his way back into fatherhood, and possibly love. As Russ stared at the screen of his phone that night, watching the video that now had thousands of shares, he whispered the same line Anne had once said while crying in his office. They didn't ask to come into this world, but they deserve the best of it. And now the question was no longer about whether he could fix his image. The question was, could he fix himself? Russ Morgan was the kind of man who made rooms fall quiet when he entered, not out of fear but admiration. At just 38, he had climbed to the top of the tech world with a charisma that couldn't be bought, and a sharp mind that turned investors into loyal followers. He lived in a high-rise condo overlooking downtown Chicago, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered him a panoramic view of everything he believed he had earned. His mornings were silent rituals: French-pressed coffee, designer suits steamed by his house assistant, and a 5-minute meditation app before stepping into his custom Blacktown car. Russ wasn't born into wealth, but you'd never guess that by how he moved. His father, a local mechanic in a small Indian, had worked until his back gave out. His mother taught Sunday school. But somewhere between childhood scrapes and his first college scholarship, Russ had made a decision. He would never live small again. By day, he was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. The press called him the man who digitized trust. His team built software that helped banks verify identities securely, a product that boomed after a few well-placed features on business news channels. He attended fundraisers hosted in private museums. He played squash with city council members and dined at invitation-only clubs. His business card was minimalist, his words always intentional. On stage, he spoke about innovation. In back rooms, he spoke about strategy. Always moving, always climbing. Despite the glimmer, Russ's life was sharply curated. Relationships were transactional. His calendar overflowed with board meetings, panels, interviews, and quarterly strategy reviews. If something wasn't profitable or promotable, it rarely held his attention. He dated rarely and casually. When asked why he wasn't married, he gave a well-practiced smirk and replied, "I'm married to progress." It always earned a chuckle, sometimes applause. But in the quiet moments, the ones no one else saw, Russ sometimes stood alone at his balcony, sipping imported whiskey, wondering if there was anything beyond achievement that could make a man feel whole. He never said those thoughts out loud, and he never imagined that someone from his past, someone he'd walked away from, might be the very thing that would one day bring all his walls crashing down. Anne Washington had never cared for luxury, but she knew the value of dignity. She lived in a quiet part of Chicago's South Side, in a small townhouse passed down from her grandmother. Her life wasn't measured by stock prices or media headlines. It was measured by prayer meetings, good meals shared with loved ones, and the joyful noise of a gospel choir lifting its voice to the heavens on Sunday mornings. Anne was 35. A project manager at a mid-sized tech firm where she led internal system upgrades and employee onboarding with calm efficiency. Her coworkers admired her for her patience, her insight, and the way she made even the most hectic weeks feel manageable. Outside of work, she was deeply rooted in her church family. Greater Mount Hope Baptist was her second home. She sang alto in the choir, organized food drives, and led mentorship circles for young girls navigating broken homes. Her pastor, Reverend Bryant, often said, "If Anne says she'll pray for you, it's already done before the words leave her lips." She was graceful, but not soft. Life had tested her far too early to let her grow fragile. Her mother had struggled with addiction. Her father had drifted in and out of her life like a storm with no warning. But through every challenge, her faith had been her anchor. She cooked Sunday dinners with her mother and grandmother, recipes passed down through generations, collard greens, baked mac and cheese, and cornbread so rich it needed no butter. After church, the kitchen smelled like heritage. Her laugh came easily, her hugs warm and anchoring. She didn't chase attention, but she drew it, not with clothes or makeup, but with the kind of light that made people feel safe just being near her. She wore her natural curls proudly, often pulled into a bun, and kept a small gold cross necklace that never left her neck, even when she slept. Anne had dated before, but never lightly. She loved deeply, seriously, with her whole heart, and when it broke, she didn't crumble. She healed in pieces, surrounded by community. No one knew that, years ago, she had loved someone who walked away when she needed him the most. No one knew that her prayers still whispered that name, not out of longing, but unfinished pain. And no one, not even Anne herself, could have predicted that the man who caused that pain would one day need her grace more than he could bear. Russ lived in a skyline of power. Anne thrived in a neighborhood of soul. His world was glass, steel, silence. Hers was wood, laughter, gospel, and casseroles. He spent weekends at rooftop bars, talking strategy with other executives whose watches cost more than Anne's rent. She spent hers helping youth at church organize college prep meetings, and cleaning out old food pantries with other volunteers. He was used to valet parking, catered lunches, espresso machines. She brewed her coffee at home, strong and sweet, in the same mug her grandmother had used for decades. Russ operated in algorithms. Anne operated in people. To him, time was currency. To her, time was a gift. Russ believed success meant independence, never needing anyone. Anne believed love was strength, not weakness, and that letting people show up for you was part of being human. They lived in the same city, but they might as well have been worlds apart. And yet, somewhere in between those worlds, a moment was waiting for them, one they wouldn't see coming. It was a late spring afternoon when their paths crossed again. Anne had been selected to attend a corporate leadership retreat outside the city, one of those multi-day sessions designed to build vision across departments. Her company had partnered with Russ's firm on a joint tech initiative, and top project leads were invited. The retreat was held at a lakeside villa, a clean, modern space with high ceilings, natural light, and overpriced snacks. Russ had just stepped off the stage after delivering a keynote presentation about innovation and digital trust. Anne had been seated near the back, notebook in hand, noting how effortlessly he moved through his presentation. She didn't even realize it was him at first, not until she saw his profile as he stepped into the lobby and time seemed to trip over itself. Their eyes met. Recognition struck like a quiet bell. She froze. He blinked. For a second, neither of them moved. The past stretched between them like a hallway without end. "Anne?" he said, voice low, uncertain. "Russ," she replied, her tone unreadable. It had been years, but in that instant the weight of everything that had been left unsaid rushed in. He extended a hand. She hesitated, then shook it, polite, formal. But her fingers were colder than he remembered. They were soon grouped together for a breakout session. Forced proximity turned into quiet tension. Polite conversation gave way to brief glances, and by the second day, they were talking over boxed lunches on a quiet patio near the lake. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I didn't expect you to remember my name," she replied. He smiled softly. "I remember everything." She didn't answer. But her eyes held questions he wasn't ready to answer. By the third day, the walls began to crack. Anne was guarded but present. Russ was composed but undeniably curious. Every conversation revealed a new layer. They spoke about goals, frustrations, the industry. She told him about her community work. He admitted he'd never really volunteered. "Maybe you should," she said. Not harsh, just honest. He laughed. "Maybe I will." During a group dinner, he pulled out her chair without thinking. During a night walk, she complimented his restraint in a heated group debate. "Didn't expect you to keep your cool," she teased. "Didn't expect you to call me out," he fired back, chuckling. There was chemistry, yes, but deeper than that, there was familiarity. Something unspoken, something that said, "We're not strangers." Not really. Russ found himself thinking about her at odd moments, when he checked his emails, when he stirred his tea. She moved with a grace that didn't ask for permission to exist. She just was, and it disarmed him. Anne, meanwhile, wrestled with caution. She knew what power looked like. But Russ, behind all the polish, seemed a little tired, a little hollow. One night, walking under dim lights outside the lodge, he asked, "Do you think people can really change?" She paused, hands in her coat pockets. "I think they can, if they want it badly enough." Their eyes locked. Neither of them spoke the words they were thinking. But something shifted. It wasn't love, but it was a spark, undeniable, inconvenient, and about to become unforgettable. The retreat ended, but something between Russ and Anne didn't. Their conversations had turned from polite to personal, from business to something much deeper. So when Russ reached out a week later, inviting Anne to meet for dinner back in the city, she didn't say yes immediately. But she didn't say no either. They met on a quiet Tuesday night at a small Italian place in Hyde Park, not the kind of spot Russ usually picked, no valet, no velvet booths. But he'd asked around for a place with good food and real atmosphere, and this was what a friend recommended. Anne arrived wearing a denim jacket over a green sundress. Russ had dressed down too, button-up rolled at the sleeves, no tie, softer than usual. He held the door for her. "I figured you didn't want steakhouse energy tonight," he said with a half grin. They talked for hours, about work, about family, about how they both liked old jazz records and movies where the ending didn't try too hard to impress. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront. The city lights shimmered on the water. The breeze played gently with Anne's curls, and Russ looked at her, not as a woman who challenged him in a meeting, but as someone he wanted to know in the spaces beyond the conference room. "What made you stay here?" he asked as they strolled. "You had offers from the coast, right?" "My community's here," she said, "my people. I like walking into places where I know the choir director's birthday and the store clerk asks about my grandma." Russ nodded, but he didn't fully understand that life. Not yet. Still, he found himself listening more than talking, which wasn't his norm. Anne had that effect. She made silence comfortable. She didn't fill the air just to avoid it. "I used to think moving away was the only way to grow," Russ admitted. "But sometimes it just feels distant." They sat on a bench near the marina, quiet for a moment. Anne looked over. "You don't have to pretend to have it all together, Russ. I know what pressure looks like, and I know loneliness when I see it." The words hit deeper than he expected. He didn't reply, just nodded slowly. Somehow, the silence said more than any speech ever could. Over the next few weeks, Russ and Anne saw each other more often. Coffee on Saturdays. Late-night calls that started with just checking in and ended with, "I don't want to hang up yet." Their rhythm formed naturally. No pressure, just presence. On one particular evening, Russ invited Anne to a private rooftop garden he'd only ever used for client entertaining. It was quiet, tucked between high-rises, with soft lights and blooming vines and raised beds. He had candles lit, a small speaker playing mellow soul, and a blanket already laid out with takeout containers from her favorite Caribbean place. "Wait, did you really drive all the way to Bronzeville to get this?" she asked, raising a brow. He shrugged. "I needed to bribe you somehow." Anne laughed and shook her head. "You're something else." As they sat, the conversation drifted, this time to dreams. "Do you ever think about slowing down?" she asked, pulling her hair into a loose ponytail. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm scared of what I'll hear in the quiet." She looked at him for a moment. "I think that's when you hear the truth." He glanced down at his drink. "And you? You ever think about starting something else? Bigger job? Different field?" Anne shrugged. "Maybe. But my real dream?" She paused, then smiled. "I want a family, not just kids. Real partnership. Someone I can grow old with, who prays with me when things go wrong and laughs with me when they don't." Russ swallowed. Something in him tightened. "I didn't grow up with that," he said quietly. "But I think I'd like it too." There was a long pause. "You'd be a good dad," she said, eyes soft. He looked surprised. "You think so?" "You listen. You try. That matters more than people realize." He reached for her hand gently. She didn't pull away. That night, under dim lights and the quiet hum of the city, Russ didn't think about strategy. He didn't think about margins. He thought about what life might feel like if peace looked like this. The first kiss didn't happen under perfect conditions. There was no soundtrack playing, no grand moment, just the quiet hum of familiarity turned electric. It was after a movie night at Anne's place. She had invited Russ over to watch an old film she loved, one she knew he'd never seen. Her living room was warm, cozy, filled with the soft scent of vanilla and the kind of lived-in comfort his condo lacked. They sat close on the couch, sharing popcorn, their hands brushing now and then. By the time the credits rolled, neither of them moved. The silence that settled between them wasn't awkward, it was charged. Anne turned to him. "You really watched the whole thing?" He smiled. "Every second, even the slow parts." She chuckled. "That was a test." He leaned in, voice low. "Did I pass?" Their faces were inches apart. The moment hovered, inviting but unforced. She whispered, "Yeah, you did." And then he kissed her. It was slow, unsure at first. Then deeper, steady, warm. The kind of kiss that silences doubt and anchors two people in a single breath. When they pulled apart, she looked at him carefully. "That wasn't part of the test," she said. He smiled. "It wasn't graded?" "No," she whispered, "but it was worth extra credit." Weeks later, after a walk in the park with ice cream and children laughing in the background, he said it. "I love you," Russ murmured, voice just loud enough to mean it. Anne didn't answer right away. She looked at him, measuring not just his words, but his growth. Then finally she replied, "I love you too." And she meant it, not because it was convenient, but because it was real. It happened on a quiet morning. Anne had been feeling off for days, fatigued, nauseous, a strange sense of fullness she couldn't explain. She'd brushed it off at first, blaming work stress or a skipped meal, but that morning as she stood in her small bathroom staring at a white test strip slowly darkening, her breath caught. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable. She sat on the edge of her tub, hands trembling. The world didn't spin, it just paused. She whispered to herself, okay, breathe." She wasn't the type to panic, but this was different, life-altering. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she smiled. A small smile, but real. She wasn't afraid of motherhood. She had helped raise nieces, mentored dozens of young girls, and grown up with resilience in her DNA. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about them. She gently touched her belly and whispered, "Hi there," and then her eyes filled with tears. Not from fear. From the magnitude of it all. She waited 3 days. 3 days of rehearsing the words, of deciding if the timing was right, if she could trust what they had, or if it would shatter under the weight of reality. They met at Russ's condo, where he had cooked, tried to cook, dinner for her, pasta, slightly overcooked, sauce too thick. But his effort? Beautiful. He poured wine. She declined gently. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded, but her eyes said more. When they sat on the couch, she reached for his hand. Hers was cold. "I need to tell you something," she said, steady but soft. Russ leaned in, sensing the shift. "What is it?" she exhaled. "I'm pregnant." The words settled between them. He blinked, his hand pulled slightly away. She continued, "I didn't plan this, but I'm not scared. I can do this, I will do this. But I need to know where you stand." Russ stared at her. She searched his face, hoping to find the man she had kissed, the one who said he loved her. But instead she saw uncertainty, panic. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. Silence spread like fog, and in that moment Anne realized this was going to change everything. The night Anne told Russ she was pregnant never left his mind, but for her, it played like a movie she never wanted to rewatch. He had gone silent for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. His hands were still, his breathing sharp. The confident CEO who could negotiate million-dollar deals was suddenly a man cornered by truth. When he finally spoke, the words came out slow, like someone trying to convince himself of what he was saying. "Anne, I can't do this. I'm not ready for this life." The sentence landed like glass shattering across the floor. Anne blinked, unable to process it at first. "What do you mean, Russ? This isn't a business deal. This is our child." He stood up and walked toward the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the skyline. "You don't understand. I've worked my whole life to get here. I can't risk everything now. The board is watching. The investors." She interrupted, tears rising. "Russ, this isn't about investors, it's about family." He exhaled sharply. "I'm not the man for that. Not now. Maybe not ever." Those words cut deeper than anything she'd ever heard. She searched his face for even a flicker of the warmth he once showed her. The man who used to walk her home in the rain, who brought her dinner after long workdays, he was gone. In his place stood someone driven by fear disguised as ambition. Anne took a step forward. "I don't need you to be perfect, Russ. I just need you to be present." He didn't turn. "I can't." The silence after that word felt heavier than the truth itself. He turned back toward her, voice softer now. "You're strong, Anne. You'll figure it out. You always do." She looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. "You mean I'll figure it out alone?" He didn't answer. And that was answer enough. Anne sat there for several seconds, hoping he would change his mind. Her heart refused to accept what her ears had heard. Russ, please. Think about what you're saying. This isn't temporary. This is life. He rubbed his temples, clearly torn but unwilling to bend. If I take this step now, everything I've worked for will fall apart. You know how it is. People watch everything I do. One wrong headline and... She stood, voice trembling. You're worried about headlines when I'm telling you you're going to be a father? Russ's shoulders tensed. You're making it sound easy. Anne's eyes softened. Love isn't supposed to be easy, Russ, but it's real. And that's what makes it worth it. He finally faced her fully, expression flat. You don't understand what it's like to have your name on a company. I can't let emotion derail me. Anne stepped closer, hand trembling slightly as she reached for him. This isn't emotion. This is our child's life. Do you hear yourself? He pulled back before she could touch him. The gesture hurt more than any insult could. Anne's voice broke, but she kept speaking. You once told me you wanted something real, that success meant nothing without love. Were those just words? He hesitated, just for a moment, and in that pause, she saw a glimpse of the man she loved. But fear swallowed it quickly. Maybe I was wrong, he said quietly. Her knees almost gave way. She covered her mouth, trying to hold in the sob that wanted to escape. Russ, please don't do this. He looked away. It's better this way. Better for who? For both of us, he replied, though even he didn't sound convinced. Anne stepped back, tears streaming freely now. No, Russ, this is better for you, because you get to walk away. But I don't. He said nothing. He just turned toward the window again, as if the city lights could justify his decision. And when Anne finally walked out of his condo that night, the air outside was colder than she'd ever remembered it being. When Anne reached home, the door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like thunder in her chest. She didn't bother turning on the lights. She sat down right on the floor of her living room, pressing her back against the door. Then the tears came, slow, uncontrollable, endless. She had been strong before, strong for coworkers, strong for family, strong for everyone who ever needed her. But that night, she couldn't be strong anymore. Her hands clutched her stomach as she whispered through tears, I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. The man she trusted with her heart had chosen ambition over life. But even through that pain, a small spark of something deeper lit inside her, a quiet defiance that whispered, You'll make it anyway. After hours of crying, she stood, washed her face, looked in the mirror. Her reflection was tired, but not defeated. She touched her belly again and whispered, You're not alone, I promise. The next day at work, she moved like nothing was wrong. She smiled at meetings, finished reports, even helped a colleague troubleshoot a system issue. No one saw her breaking inside, but when she returned home that evening, she allowed herself the silence again, the kind that heals through exhaustion. Late that night, she picked up her Bible, the same one her grandmother had given her, pages worn from use. She opened to a verse highlighted years before, When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Her tears fell again, but softer this time. They weren't from despair anymore. They were the kind that cleanse. Anne realized she couldn't control Russ's choices, but she could control her response, and that response would be strength. By Sunday morning, Anne decided she wouldn't face this alone. She walked into Greater Mount Hope Baptist a few minutes before service began. The sanctuary buzzed with greetings and laughter. Gospel music filled the air. When her best friend, Simone, spotted her, she knew something was wrong immediately. Anne's smile didn't reach her eyes. They sat together in the pew. When the choir began singing He'll Make a Way, Anne's tears returned, but this time, they carried hope. After service, Simone wrapped her arms around her. You don't have to tell me everything, she said softly, but you don't have to go through it alone either. Anne finally told her. The pregnancy, Russ's reaction, the fear she was still learning to manage. Simone listened without interrupting once. When Anne finished, she said firmly, "You're stronger than this moment, Anne, and you're already loved. We'll make sure those babies never feel like they're missing a thing." Over the next few weeks, the church became her safety net. Reverend Bryant prayed with her privately. Older women from the congregation dropped off meals. Choir members checked in after work. Even the youth group surprised her with a handmade blanket for the future little ones. At home, her evenings changed. She sang softly while preparing dinner, talked to the life growing inside her, and began journaling letters she planned to read to her children someday. The pain was still there, deep and undeniable, but faith gave it shape. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was purpose forming quietly in the dark. One night, as she sat on her porch, watching the streetlights glow, she whispered to the night air, "Lord, I don't know how, but I trust you'll turn this into something beautiful." And though no voice answered aloud, peace settled gently around her. It was the first night in weeks that she slept without tears. The months that followed were a mixture of quiet strength and silent tears. Anne learned to carry her growing belly and her responsibilities with grace that only faith could explain. Each morning before work, she stood in front of her mirror, rubbing her stomach softly. "Good morning, little ones," she whispered. "Mommy's going to do her best today." She refused to let the absence of rust define her days. Instead, she filled that space with music and hope. Her apartment became a sanctuary of small victories, fresh flowers on the table, prenatal vitamins arranged neatly beside her Bible, soft blankets folded by the couch she often fell asleep on. At work, she kept her composure. No one knew the full story, but a few coworkers sensed her quiet determination. When they offered help, she accepted it without pride. That was one of the first lessons motherhood taught her. Strength doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means doing everything with faith. Nights were the hardest. The silence pressed against her walls like a reminder of what was missing, but even then she would sit near her window with a cup of tea, feeling the small movements beneath her skin. Sometimes she cried, not because she regretted anything, but because she was overwhelmed by love and fear all at once. She started journaling every evening. Her entries weren't long, just small notes written in a careful hand. "They moved again today. I think one's going to be more active than the other. I'm scared, but I trust God. I really do." Every word became part of a conversation between her and the life growing inside her. And though the world saw a woman walking alone, heaven saw a mother, already surrounded by angels. By the second trimester, her belly had grown enough to draw gentle smiles from strangers on the bus and warm nods from church elders. Her first ultrasound was a turning point. As the technician turned the screen toward her, Anne's heart nearly stopped. 2 small heartbeats flickered across the monitor. Tiny, perfect, steady. "Congratulations," the nurse said softly. "You're having twins." Anne gasped. Tears filled her eyes. "2?" she whispered. The nurse nodded. 2 miracles. That evening, Anne sat in her car long after the appointment ended. She laughed through tears, whispering, "You two already doubled my blessings before I even met you." Her faith family shared in her joy. When word spread through Greater Mount Hope, the congregation decided to throw her a community baby shower. The church hall was decorated with soft yellow and mint colors, balloons tied to every chair, gospel music playing in the background. Elderly women shared advice about motherhood, while the youth group carried in gifts wrapped with care: diapers, tiny clothes, picture books, and bottles. Simone led a prayer before they ate. "Lord, thank you for these babies. May they grow surrounded by love, peace, and purpose. And may Anne never forget that she's never alone, because you've placed her in a family that's far bigger than blood." The room echoed with amen. Later that night, Anne sat in bed surrounded by small clothes and baby blankets. Her eyes filled with gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but she realized something profound. Love had found her again, just in a different form. She began singing softly, a lullaby her grandmother used to hum when she was little. "Sleep, my child, the stars will keep you. Dream, my love, the Lord will lead you." As she sang, the babies kicked gently, and Anne smiled. It wasn't the life she expected, but it was beautiful. It was just past 3 a.m. when Anne's contractions began. She woke with a sharp wave of pain, clutching her stomach. For a brief moment, fear tried to creep in, but she remembered Simone's words, "You've got a whole army praying for you." By the time Simone arrived to drive her to the hospital, the contractions were closer together. "You're doing great," Simone kept saying, even as Anne gripped her hand through each wave. The hospital room was bright, sterile, and filled with activity. Nurses moved quickly, monitoring every heartbeat. "You're doing beautifully," one of them said as Anne breathed through another contraction. "Both babies are strong." Hours later, with the morning light breaking through the window, Anne heard the first cry. A daughter. "Nia," she whispered, tears flooding her eyes. "You're here." Moments later, another cry filled the room. A son. "Zane," she breathed, voice trembling. "You made it too." The nurse laid them both in her arms, tiny faces pink and perfect, their fingers curling instinctively around her thumb. In that instant, the world stopped. Anne felt something deeper than happiness, something sacred. Every tear, every night of loneliness, every unanswered question. It all made sense now. She pressed her lips to Nia's forehead, then to Zane's. "Welcome, my miracles." When Simone entered the room, she stopped short, tears welling instantly. "Oh, Anne, they're beautiful." Anne smiled weakly. "They're everything I prayed for." For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the absence of anyone. Because she wasn't missing anything. Everything she needed was right there in her arms. The days after the twins' birth were filled with quiet wonder. Anne spent hours simply watching them sleep, tiny chests rising and falling, soft coos filling the room. Late one night, after feeding them, she rocked gently in her chair. The apartment was dim except for the warm light of a small lamp. Nia stirred in her arms while Zane slept in the crib beside. Anne whispered softly, "You don't know it yet, but you've already changed me. Everything I am now exists because of you two." A tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but overwhelming peace. She glanced toward the ceiling and spoke softly. "Lord, I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know you'll be their father when I can't be everything. They have a Father in heaven who loves them more than I ever could." At that moment, something shifted in her heart. The emptiness Russ left behind no longer haunted her. It had been replaced by a purpose that filled every breath. She raised her children surrounded by that same faith. Sunday mornings were spent at church, with the twins sleeping on her lap during sermons. Weekdays were for laughter, bedtime prayers, and stories about courage and kindness. When Nia smiled, it reminded her of joy. When Zane laughed, it reminded her of grace. She kept Russ's name out of her bitterness and replaced it with hope in her prayers. "God," she whispered every night, when they're old enough to ask about their father, "help me tell them the truth without anger. Help me show them that love doesn't end just because people walk away. It just finds new ways to live." Years later, when friends from church saw her pushing the stroller down the sidewalk, they'd say, "There goes Anne and her blessings," and she would smile every time. Because they were right. Her twins were blessings, proof that even broken beginnings can birth beautiful stories. Russ Morgan had always known how to climb. After Anne left his life, he poured himself completely into work. Days that bled into nights, deadlines that replaced feelings, and success that disguised the emptiness he didn't want to face. Within 3 years, his company, Core Tech Innovations, became one of the fastest-growing firms in the tech sector. What began as a small identity verification startup evolved into a multinational player with major contracts from banks and government agencies. Investors called Russ a visionary. Analysts compared him to pioneers who changed the business landscape. He had mastered every rule of the corporate world. He understood timing, tone, and power. When other executives hesitated, he moved. When competitors stumbled, he acquired. Every decision sharpened his image. The board admired him. The press couldn't get enough of him. His speeches at conferences were confident and quotable. But beneath the spotlight, his private world was sterile. An expensive apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city he barely noticed anymore. Every morning started the same. A short run, black coffee, 3 phone calls before breakfast, and a driver waiting downstairs. His assistant handled every small detail, from his calendar to his grocery orders, leaving Russ free to chase the next big deal. He told himself this was what he wanted, that this was the price of winning, that the rest, family, love, softness, was distraction, promotions, awards, recognition. Russ Morgan was unstoppable. At least, that's what he wanted to believe. 2 years later, Russ moved the company's main headquarters to New York City. The skyline felt like a reflection of himself, ambitious, relentless, impossible to ignore. From his new office on the 47th floor, he could see everything: the Hudson River glistening in the distance, taxis weaving through traffic far below, and billboards flashing products his company helped secure through their verification systems. It was launch week for CoreVault, a new encrypted platform that promised to revolutionize online privacy. Reporters gathered in the glass atrium of the building, cameras flashing as Russ rehearsed his lines one last time. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and assured. "Today we redefine trust in the digital world." Applause followed. Every word was rehearsed to perfection. Every smile timed. The event trended online within hours. Articles titled "Russ Morgan, the man who built tomorrow," flooded the internet. His name became synonymous with innovation. That night he attended a private celebration on a rooftop terrace overlooking Times Square. Champagne glasses clinked, jazz music played softly, and the lights of the city painted gold across the faces of guests. But when the laughter died down, and the crowd's cheers became background noise, Russ stood alone at the edge of the balcony staring at the city lights. They looked endless. But so did the emptiness behind his eyes. He raised his glass to himself, whispering, "To the man who made it." But even he didn't believe the toast. The following months cemented Russ's dominance in the industry. His company secured contracts with several financial giants. The stock price surged. Core Tech became a case study at major business schools. He appeared on magazine covers. Business shows requested interviews. His face was everywhere, confident, polished, untouchable. In board meetings, his presence commanded attention. He spoke in precise tones, presenting data like poetry. Even seasoned directors deferred to him. "Gentlemen," he said during one quarterly review, "we don't chase trends, we create them." The room erupted in applause. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Behind every victory was an exhaustion he couldn't admit. He often returned home past midnight, loosened his tie, and sat in silence. His television stayed off. His phone lit up constantly, but no call ever mattered. There were nights when he'd catch his reflection in the mirror and wonder how the man looking back had once believed in something as fragile as love. He tried to ignore the thought. Instead, he doubled down on work. The next morning he was back in meetings, reviewing global projections, approving partnerships, and mentoring younger executives who saw him as a living legend. "Work harder," he'd tell them. "Everything else will wait." But what he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that everything else had already slipped away. Success had given Russ every tangible reward he could imagine, yet peace remained out of reach. Some nights he'd come home and stand in the middle of his apartment, lights dim, city noise filtering faintly through the glass. He'd remove his cufflinks, loosen his collar, and stare into the distance where the skyline glowed like an unending fire. He had money, but no warmth. Prestige, but no presence. His days were structured, but his nights had no meaning. Sometimes he caught himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, events, trips, and dinners with people he no longer remembered. He rarely took pictures of himself, but he still had one hidden in a folder he hadn't opened in years, a photo of Anne laughing at a retreat, wind tugging her curls, sunlight catching her smile. He lingered on it for a moment, then locked his phone and set it face down. At work, he pushed harder. He signed deals that others said were impossible. He traveled to Europe, Asia, back to the States. He stayed in five-star hotels, attended charity galas, shook hands with mayors and governors. But when the applause ended and the speeches were over, he always felt it, that quiet, persistent hollowness that success couldn't fill. It crept in like a whisper, reminding him of everything he'd traded away for control. And no matter how many contracts he signed or awards he collected, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something he once held but didn't value until it was gone. It was a casual business luncheon that changed everything. One of his senior managers, Lydia, mentioned a local Chicago tech project during small talk. They're working with an independent consultant named Anne Washington, brilliant woman, really grounded. She's a single mom of twins, I think. Russ froze mid-sip. The sound of her name was like static in his chest. Anne Washington? He asked quietly. Lydia nodded. Yes, that's her. She's done great work coordinating community tech initiatives. They said she's balancing everything perfectly. Honestly, her reputation's incredible. Russ tried to mask his reaction, but his hands betrayed him, the slightest tremor as he set his glass down. Twins? He asked, voice almost too low to hear. Yeah, Lydia said casually. Cute kids from what I heard. She's doing it all on her own. Inspiring story, actually. Russ nodded mechanically, but his mind had already left the table. That evening, he sat alone in his office, long after everyone had gone home. The city lights flickered through the glass walls, but his focus was somewhere else. On a name, a memory, and a possibility he had buried years ago. He searched her name online. There she was, a profile photo on a community page, smiling warmly, holding two children close, a boy and a girl. He zoomed in. The boy's eyes, his eyes. Russ leaned back, breath unsteady. He stared at the screen for what felt like an hour, the realization crawling up his spine. They were his. They had to be. His pride twisted first into disbelief, then into something darker, a bruised ego that whispered, "How dare she build a life without you?" But beneath that, a quieter truth pulsed. She didn't need you. And that's what hurts the most. Russ shut his laptop and stared out the window, jaw tight. For the first time in years, success didn't feel like victory. It felt like punishment. The boardroom buzzed with excitement as Russ stood before the executive panel, presenting plans for the upcoming Core Tech Anniversary Gala, a celebration marking 10 years since the company's founding. This event, Russ said, voice calm but authoritative, isn't just about recognition. It's about reasserting dominance in a market that's watching us. He clicked through slides, sponsorship tiers, celebrity appearances, charity tie-ins, press coverage. Every detail was flawless, the kind of event that screamed prestige. Board members nodded in approval. One executive, a silver-haired investor, smiled. "Russ, this will cement your legacy." He returned the smile, but inside, something else stirred, something personal. That night, long after the meeting ended, Russ remained in his office, gazing at the finalized event mock-ups on his screen. The gala would be held at the Metropolitan Grand, one of New York's most luxurious hotels. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, a skyline view worthy of magazine covers. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the desk rhythmically. The idea that had been circling his thoughts for weeks finally took shape. He didn't just want this gala to celebrate his achievements. He wanted it to make a statement, one aimed at a very specific person, Anne Washington, the woman who had raised his children without him. The woman who had built a life outside his shadow. The woman who somehow still existed in quiet grace while he lived in the spotlight. He told himself it wasn't bitterness, just closure. a chance to show her what she had missed, to prove that walking away from him was walking away from greatness. The truth, however, was far more fragile. It wasn't pride alone driving him, it was the ache of being forgotten. He picked up his phone and sent a short message to his assistant. Book the Metropolitan Grand for the 14th. Full press access. Theme, a decade of vision. Let's make it unforgettable. He stared at the screen a moment longer before locking it. Unforgettable. That word lingered, though not for the reasons the world expected. Russ sat in the quiet of his penthouse later that night, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The city stretched endlessly beyond the window, lights blinking like artificial stars. He thought about the photo he'd seen of Anne online, her smile, the children beside her. The way she looked content, even without him, that image unsettled him in ways he didn't want to admit. How could she look so whole, when he had everything the world said mattered? He opened his laptop again, and scrolled through the event guest list, adding one more name manually, Anne Washington. He told himself it was a gesture of goodwill, a symbolic olive branch. But his real motive was darker. He wanted her to walk into that ballroom and see him surrounded by success, power, and influence. He wanted her to feel small, out of place. The plan formed like a script in his mind. He would greet her warmly in front of the cameras, introduce her to key investors, smile politely while mentioning how life takes us in different directions. The crowd would admire him, the polished, forgiving man, while she would be left quietly uncomfortable. It was revenge, disguised as charm. He even drafted notes for the speech he'd deliver that night. Lines about overcoming hardship, about sacrifice and vision, about how some choices lead to greatness while others lead to different paths. But underneath the self-assured planning was an unease that wouldn't fade. Each time he imagined her reaction, something in him twisted, guilt or pride, he couldn't tell anymore. Still, he pressed on. Pride always won in the boardroom, and this felt like another kind of boardroom. Only this time the stakes were personal. He picked up his pen and scrawled one final note beside her name on the guest list. Front row seating. Very important person placement. Not out of respect, but so she wouldn't be able to avoid seeing him when the lights hit the stage. As the gala drew near, Russ threw himself into preparation. Every detail mattered. The lighting, the seating, the press coverage, even the color of his suit. He instructed his stylist, classic black, clean cut, confidence, not arrogance. But the mirror reflected something else. A man rehearsing control, hiding the insecurity beneath perfection. In his private moments, Russ practiced his speech again and again. Tonight we celebrate resilience, the kind that builds empires from vision. Some people walk away from challenges, others rise above them. He paused after that line, letting it echo in the quiet room. He knew exactly who that line was aimed at. Let them see how far I've come, he muttered under his breath. While she stayed behind, the bitterness in his tone startled even him. He exhaled sharply and set his notes down. He tried to convince himself that this was just symbolic, not personal. But the lie didn't hold long. The truth was simple. Anne had moved on and it bothered him. She had found peace in simplicity, purpose in motherhood, and love in her community. The very things he dismissed years ago as distractions. Now, seeing her live freely without his name attached felt like betrayal to his ego. In meetings leading up to the gala, he masked his tension with professionalism. He smiled through rehearsals and interviews, his publicist praising his composure. But behind closed doors, he couldn't shake the nagging thought that haunted him at night. What if she isn't impressed? What if she doesn't care? That possibility scared him more than failure ever did. Because if Anne could walk into that room and look at everything he had built without flinching, it meant the one thing he refused to admit, that he no longer had power over her. And that realization would break the image he had built brick by brick. So he told himself again, quietly but firmly, let them see, let her see, I've won. But somewhere deep down he knew, If you have to prove you've won, maybe you haven't. The invitation arrived at Anne's home on a Thursday evening, a sleek black envelope with her name embossed in gold letters. Inside was a formal card. Mr. Russ Morgan and CoreTech Innovations cordially invite you to the 10-year anniversary gala, a night of vision and legacy. Location: the Metropolitan Grand Ballroom. Dress code: formal. Please reply required. Anne read the name twice, her breath catching slightly. She hadn't seen or heard from Russ in nearly 6 years. The last memory she had of him was the look on his face the night he walked away. For a moment she considered throwing it out, but curiosity, and perhaps closure, stopped her. She sat at the dining table, the twins coloring beside her. Nia glanced up and asked, "What's that, Mommy?" Anne smiled softly. "Just an invitation, baby. To something fancy." Zane grinned. "You should go." She laughed gently. "We'll see." Later that night she reread the note. The wording was polite, professional, but something about it felt rehearsed. Still, a part of her wondered if this was his way of making peace. Meanwhile, in New York, Russ's assistant confirmed her "please reply." She accepted, she said, passing him the confirmation email. Russ nodded slowly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Good. He leaned back in his chair, the city skyline glowing behind him. It's time people remembered who's in control. But as he stared out the window, the reflection staring back wasn't the same confident man he used to be. Because for all his talk of control, he was about to invite the very truth he'd buried for years, right into the center of his spotlight. The evening arrived in full brilliance. The Metropolitan Grand Ballroom glowed beneath chandeliers that spilled light like liquid gold. Guests in elegant attire filled the vast room, the air alive with laughter, champagne bubbles, and the clink of crystal glasses. The walls shimmered with banners reading CoreTech, a decade of vision. Reporters mingled with donors, photographers lined the red carpet, and staff moved swiftly between tables, ensuring everything went exactly as planned. Russ Morgan stood near the entrance, the picture of composure. Dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, he shook hands with investors and smiled for the flashing cameras. Every movement, every word, was choreographed. To the world he looked untouchable, the man who built an empire from nothing. He greeted senators, CEOs, and media figures who came to celebrate the name Russ Morgan. The same name that now graced magazine covers and tech awards alike. As the night progressed, the orchestra began to play a soft melody. Waiters poured another round of champagne. The stage gleamed, polished and ready for the speech everyone was waiting to hear. His. Behind the calm facade, Russ felt the quiet rush of anticipation. He had been planning this night for months. Every detail, every camera angle, every moment designed to highlight his success and, more privately, his victory over a past he thought he had buried. Soon the lights would dim, and he would take the stage, the world watching, the press recording, and perhaps Anne, sitting quietly among the crowd. He had arranged her seating carefully. A perfect vantage point. Front row, very important person section, close enough to see everything. He straightened his cufflinks, nodded to his assistant, and prepared for the performance of his life. The lights softened as a hush settled over the ballroom. Russ stepped onto the stage to the sound of polite applause. The orchestra quieted, cameras adjusted, and for a brief moment, all eyes were his. He smiled, confident, steady, and began. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we celebrate 10 years of vision, courage, and innovation. 10 years of believing that with the right mindset, no obstacle is too great." The crowd nodded, responding with small claps of approval. His voice carried the same authority that had made investors trust him and competitors fear him. He continued smoothly. "When I founded CoreTech, I had nothing but an idea and determination. There were setbacks, there were sacrifices, but every struggle shaped the man you see standing before you tonight." Another wave of applause. Cameras flashed. He scanned the crowd briefly. business partners, politicians, media representatives. And there she was, Anne, elegant in a simple but striking navy blue gown, her hair styled neatly, her posture composed. And beside her, 2 children. For a split second, Russ's heart stumbled in his chest. He hadn't expected her to bring them. He swallowed, forcing his expression to remain neutral as he continued. We've built something remarkable, together. And tonight isn't just about celebrating success, but acknowledging everyone who believed in the vision when it was only a dream. Applause rose again, echoing through the hall. But Russ's focus was no longer on his audience. His eyes kept drifting to the front, to Anne, to the children seated beside her, to the unexpected reality staring back at him. He cleared his throat, voice tightening slightly. It's humbling to look around and realize how far we've come. The pause was subtle but noticeable. A ripple of confusion crossed the audience. His assistant glanced up from the side of the stage, sensing the hesitation. Russ forced a smile, shifting his tone. And tonight, I want to remind everyone that true progress isn't about where you start, but where you end up. He regained rhythm, the audience clapping once more, unaware that the man on stage was unraveling inside. Because for the first time in years, Russ wasn't thinking about success. He was thinking about consequence. Anne had hesitated for days before deciding to come. She told herself it was closure, one final step to face the past she had already forgiven. When she arrived that evening, her hands trembled slightly as she stepped out of the car. But her heart was calm. Nia and Zane stood beside her, dressed neatly, Nia in a soft white dress, Zane in a small gray suit and bow tie. Both held her hands tightly as they entered the ballroom, heads turning, whispers following. Anne ignored the looks. She wasn't here for spectacle. She found her seat, exactly where the invitation had promised, front and center. The music, the lights, the wealth around her. All of it felt like a world she had once known but no longer belonged to. When Russ walked on stage, Nia's small hand tightened around hers. "Mommy," she whispered, "that's him?" Anne nodded gently. "Yes, baby. That's him." Zane tilted his head curiously. "He's famous?" Anne smiled softly. "He's important to some people. But to you two, he's just a man who once forgot what mattered." The children didn't fully understand, but they sensed something serious. As the speech began, Anne watched Russ carefully. His polished words, his charm, his calculated pauses. He looked powerful, yes, but also empty. She saw through him. Through the designer suit, the confidence, the smile. She saw the man who had once turned away from love, and the weight of what he'd lost. She didn't plan to cause a scene. That wasn't her nature. But life has a way of deciding moments for us. And tonight, something greater than pride was about to speak. It happened in an instant that would echo for years. Russ had just concluded the main portion of his speech. Applause filled the hall as he prepared to step down from the stage. The cameras were still rolling, flashes blinding from the back row. From the front, Anne stood. At first no one noticed. Then whispers rippled across the room as she walked forward, the twins holding her hands. Russ froze, his microphone still in hand. The applause faded into a heavy silence. Anne's voice, calm and steady, carried across the room. "Russ," every head turned. The air thickened. She stopped halfway to the stage and looked directly at him. "You've built a remarkable company. You've inspired people. But there's one truth missing from your story tonight." He stared at her, trying to keep composure, but his heart pounded loud enough to drown out the noise around him. Anne glanced down at Nia and Zane, then back up at him. Her next words cut through the tension like lightning. "These are my children," she said clearly. "And their father is standing right there," gasps echoed. A reporter dropped a pen. Cameras began clicking furiously. Russ's face went pale. "Anne." She raised her hand to stop him. "You can pretend the past didn't happen, Russ, but you can't pretend they don't exist." Nia clung to her arm. Zane looked up, confused but quiet. For a moment, the world stood still. The mighty CEO who had everything was suddenly stripped bare in front of the very audience that once worshipped him. The silence broke, not with words, but with flashes of cameras as reporters surged forward, documenting the collapse of a perfect image. Anne reached into her small clutch and calmly pulled out 2 folded papers. She handed them to the nearest event photographer. "Since you all love proof," she said softly, "here it is." The man hesitated, then unfolded them. His eyes widened. "They're official," he whispered, just loud enough for others to hear. "Birth certificates." The murmurs became a storm. Journalists began snapping rapid shots, flashes firing like strobe lights. Russ's world blurred. The ballroom, the guests, the cameras, everything merged into a dizzying chaos of sound and light. He tried to speak, but no words came. Anne's voice rose once more, steady despite the frenzy. "You once told me you weren't ready for this life," she said, her tone firm yet free of spite. "But this life didn't wait for you. It grew without you, and tonight, the world deserves to know the truth, not to shame you, but to free me." The words hit like thunder. She turned to her children, kneeling to their level, her expression softening. "Say hello, babies." Zane waved shyly. "Hi." Nia smiled, holding her brother's hand. The cameras captured it all, the innocence, the contrast, the truth. Russ stood frozen, the microphone slipping from his hand. The sound echoed as it hit the floor. Some guests turned away awkwardly, others whispered, some shook their heads in disbelief. The press surged forward again, shouting questions, flashes intensifying. Anne remained calm, gathering her children. She didn't look back at Russ as she walked out, the crowd parting silently around her. Every step she took echoed louder than his applause ever had. By the time the ballroom doors closed behind her, Russ Morgan's reputation, and illusion of control, had collapsed under the weight of truth. The flashes continued long after she was gone. And in that blinding light, Russ finally saw what he had lost. Not his image, not his career, but the only part of his life that ever truly mattered. By midnight, the story was everywhere. Clips from the gala flooded every social platform, short videos of Anne's calm voice cutting through the ballroom, still photos of her holding the twins' hands, and the final image that broke the internet. Russ Morgan frozen on stage, face pale, microphone on the floor. Within hours, hashtags trended globally. That CEO father scandal, and core tech truth, on Anne and the twins. Comment sections overflowed with shock, outrage, and fascination. Some defended Anne's courage, others dissected Russ's silence frame by frame. Every angle of that moment became viral content. You can't claim integrity and hide your own children. She handled that with grace. He looked guilty. That man built a company on trust but couldn't honor his own. By sunrise, millions had seen it. Every platform, from tech blogs to entertainment feeds, circulated clips of the confrontation. Even late-night talk shows made jokes about it. Russ's PR team tried to suppress footage, but it was impossible. The internet had already taken over. At Cortex headquarters, employees whispered in hallways, staring at their phones. Some avoided eye contact when Russ walked past the next morning. The empire he had built on image and influence was cracking. Not from competition or loss, but from truth. For the first time in years, Russ wasn't leading the conversation. He was the subject of it, and the world wasn't kind. The next day's newspapers and online headlines were merciless. CEO ambushed by past at gala. Woman claims twins are his children. Russ Morgan's golden image tarnished by shocking revelation. From innovation to infamy, tech mogul's family scandal rocks industry. Major media outlets replayed the clip repeatedly, analyzing every second. Talk panels debated it as though it were a national event. Business analysts questioned his leadership ethics, while lifestyle commentators praised Anne's composure. News anchors narrated the story in somber tones. What was supposed to be a night of celebration for one of the country's most successful CEOs turned into a public reckoning. One magazine published a photo collage, Russ on stage, Anne's unwavering stance, the twins by her side, with the headline, "The Truth Behind the Spotlight." Stock analysts began warning investors about volatility. Reporters camped outside Cortex offices and his Manhattan penthouse. Russ's publicist Karen fielded calls from every major outlet, her voice tight and exhausted. "Mr. Morgan is unavailable for comment. A statement will be released shortly." But statements couldn't undo what was already permanent. The story had become more than a headline. It was a symbol. A man once celebrated for creating technology that promoted trust had lost the very trust of the public. By Monday morning, the Cortex boardroom was filled with tension thick enough to silence even the boldest voices. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights as board members shuffled papers, avoiding direct eye contact with Russ. At the head of the table sat Lydia Harrison, one of the company's most influential directors, sharp, experienced, and unafraid to speak her mind. She broke the silence first. "Russ, this isn't just bad publicity, it's catastrophic." He said nothing, staring at his folded hands. Another director chimed in, voice clipped. "We're fielding calls from partners. Our biggest investor in Europe has paused contract negotiations. They're questioning leadership ethics." Russ lifted his gaze slightly. "We can handle it. I'll issue a statement. The story will fade." Lydia leaned forward. "No, it won't. This isn't a rumor. It's visual evidence. The public doesn't forget moments like that. You built this company on integrity. That's our brand. If people start associating you with deceit, we lose everything." Silence followed. Another board member added, "The press conference scheduled for next week, we're postponing it indefinitely." Russ clenched his jaw. "You think canceling appearances makes me look stronger?" "It makes you look human," Lydia replied, "which frankly might be better than looking heartless right now." He leaned back in his chair, struggling to contain the frustration clawing inside him. They discussed possible damage control options, legal teams, PR consultants, crisis managers. None of it sounded like a solution, only survival tactics. When the meeting ended, Russ remained seated as everyone filed out. Lydia paused at the door, her voice softer now. "You're a brilliant leader, Russ. But brilliance doesn't erase the past. Fix this before it fixes you." Then she left him alone, with silence as loud as guilt. The next 48 hours were chaos. Russ met with the company's public relations firm, legal counsel, and senior staff in back-to-back sessions. The same questions repeated over and over. What do we say? How do we respond? Can we spin this? Charts, headlines, and social metrics covered the conference table. Every statistic told the same story. The company's trust rating had dropped by 20% overnight. He rubbed his temples. "You mean stand in front of cameras and apologize for having children?" She sighed. "No. Apologize for denying them, for pretending they didn't exist. There's a difference." He didn't respond. The PR strategist chimed in, flipping through slides. "We suggest a televised statement, something controlled, heartfelt. You own the mistake before the narrative owns you." Russ frowned. "So I humiliate myself again?" "No," Karen said, her voice softening. "You show the world that you're still human. You show remorse." Her words hung in the air. For a man like Russ, vulnerability had always been a weakness. But now, arrogance was a greater enemy. By the end of the meeting, no decisions had been finalized. The weight of uncertainty pressed on him like gravity. Outside, reporters waited in clusters, cameras pointed at the building entrance. Russ exited through a side door, escorted by security, his mind replaying the scene from the gala over and over. No amount of planning, no polished statement, could erase the truth the world had seen, the truth he once refused to face. By the end of the week, Cortex legal department issued an internal ethics memo. It wasn't directed at Russ by name, but everyone knew what it meant. The subject line read, "Professional Conduct and Personal Accountability." The memo outlined the company's commitment to ethical representation and reminded executives that personal actions reflect organizational values. Employees whispered about it in the hallways. Some avoided meeting his eyes, others sympathized quietly. But the majority just wanted distance. Meanwhile, PR firms scrambled to shape the narrative. Draft statements were reviewed and rewritten countless times. Mr. Morgan takes full responsibility. This experience has been a reminder of the importance of family and integrity. Core Tech remains committed to transparency and trust. Every version sounded hollow to him. None of it could replace what had been lost. Online forums continued dissecting the scandal. Talk shows debated forgiveness versus accountability. Shareholders demanded updates. Even industry conferences removed his name from upcoming panels. Russ had gone from being the authority on digital trust to a symbol of personal contradiction. He realized something then. When your brand is built on perfection, one truth is enough to undo it all. And now, that truth had a name: Anne Washington. The city outside his window looked cold that night, distant, detached, alive in a way he no longer was. Russ sat alone on his couch, tie loosened, jacket discarded, the dim light from his phone illuminating his face. He opened the same community page he'd seen weeks before. Anne's smile filled the screen again, her arms around Nia and Zane. He zoomed in slightly, studying every detail. Nia's bright expression, Zane's curious grin. The twins looked happy, whole, without him. His thumb hovered over the screen before he whispered, "I wasn't there." He scrolled through other photos. Anne at the church fundraiser, Anne at a local STEM event for kids, Anne reading to the twins at a library opening. Each image painted the same truth. She had built a life full of meaning and grace, one that didn't need his approval. He remembered her words at the gala, "You can't pretend they don't exist." Those words had become a mirror. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond pride. Remorse. His phone buzzed. Karen had sent another email draft for his approval. He ignored it. He opened his photo gallery instead. Hidden among folders was the picture of Anne from years ago, at the retreat where they first reconnected. Her laughter had been unguarded then, genuine. He stared at it for a long time before finally setting the phone face down beside him. Outside, New York's skyline glimmered like it always did, proud and indifferent. Inside, Russ Morgan sat in silence, surrounded by everything money could buy, and haunted by the one thing it never could: peace. 2 weeks passed since the chaos. The world had moved on to new scandals, but Russ hadn't. Every night, his mind replayed the moment Anne stood before him, unshaken, unashamed, truthful. Then one morning, as sunlight crept across his desk, his phone vibrated. A message, the sender, Anne Washington. His pulse quickened as he opened it. "If you truly want to make amends, meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 10 a.m. Russ read it again and again, each word hitting harder than the last. He wasn't sure what awaited him there, forgiveness or final judgment, but something deep inside told him he had to go. That night, sleep refused him. He kept seeing her face, remembering the strength in her eyes. For years he had convinced himself that success erased regret. But now success felt like an empty building, echoing with silence. When morning came, he arrived early. The park was quiet, filled with the soft hum of joggers and the laughter of children playing near the fountain. He sat on a bench, unsure how to begin. Then he saw her. Anne walked slowly down the path, her coat buttoned against the breeze. Beside her, two small figures, Nia and Zane, skipped forward, their laughter bright, unaware of the storm that had once existed between their parents. For the first time in years, Russ stood without pride. No suit, no cameras, no boardroom, just a man waiting for grace he didn't deserve. Anne approached with calm dignity. "You came," she said simply. He nodded, his voice low. I had to. She glanced toward the twins. They don't know much, just that their father wanted to see them. Let's take this one step at a time. Russ knelt slowly as the twins stopped a few feet away. Hi, he said softly. I'm Russ. Zane tilted his head curiously. Mom said you wanted to meet us. Nia, always observant, held her mother's hand tighter. Are you the man from the big stage? Russ hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. Yes, I am. Zane frowned slightly. You look scared. Anne nearly smiled. He was, sweetheart. Russ looked at the boy. You're right, Zane, I was scared. I made mistakes, but I wanted to meet you, both of you, because I don't want to keep being that man. Nia studied him quietly. There was a softness in her eyes that reminded him of Anne years ago, cautious but kind. Do you like pancakes? He asked, unsure what else to say. Zane's face lit up. With syrup? Russ chuckled, voice breaking the tension. With as much syrup as you want. Anne watched the exchange carefully. She could see he was trying, awkwardly, sincerely. The park around them buzzed with life, children running, couples walking dogs, leaves rustling in the wind. It was strange to see him there, not commanding a room but lowering himself to a child's level. Zane tugged his sleeve. Can we play on the swings? Russ looked at Anne, waiting for approval. She nodded once. Go ahead. As he pushed the twins gently on the swings, laughter filled the air. Nia giggled loudly while Zane shouted, Higher, Daddy! Russ froze. That word, it slipped out of the child's mouth so naturally, so innocently. He blinked hard, swallowing emotion. Anne saw it too. The look in his eyes, that quiet shock of grace. For the first time in a long time, Russ Morgan looked human again. The next weekend, they met again. This time, Anne allowed the twins to spend an afternoon with him at the park. She sat on a nearby bench, her Bible open but unread, her focus quietly fixed on them. Russ brought small gifts, not expensive, just thoughtful. Sketchbooks, crayons, and a puzzle set shaped like skyscrapers. Zane began building a tower. Like your company? He asked. Russ smiled faintly. Maybe, but yours looks stronger. Nia drew a picture. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. She handed it to him shyly. This is us. He looked at it, his throat tightening. It's perfect, Nia. They played, laughed, and shared small moments. Nothing grand, nothing staged. Just time. As the day ended, Russ knelt to tie Zane's shoelace. You're getting good at running, he said. Zane grinned. Thanks, Daddy. The word hung in the air, soft yet seismic. Russ looked up, eyes misting. What did you say? Zane hesitated. Mom said it's okay to call you that, if we want to. He turned to Anne, who stood a few feet away, her arms crossed but her expression gentle. She'd told us you're trying, Nia added. And that trying counts. Russ swallowed hard. It does. It really does. He hugged them both tightly, careful, emotional, overwhelmed. Anne looked away for a moment, letting tears fall silently. She had prayed for this, not for revenge, not for public apology, but for redemption. And somehow, that redemption had arrived. In the simple sound of 2 small voices calling him Daddy, Russ made a promise, and for once he kept it. He began showing up. At first it was small things. Picking the twins up from school on Fridays, dropping by with snacks after work, attending the parent-teacher, meeting quietly in the back row. Teachers whispered, surprised to see the famous CEO waiting patiently by the school gate, holding lunchboxes instead of headlines. One evening he stopped by Anne's apartment with a bag full of storybooks. I found these, he said, almost shyly, thought maybe they'd like them. Anne hesitated, then nodded. Come in. That night, he read to them. His voice started awkward, uncertain, but as the twins listened intently, his tone softened. He read Good Night Moon twice because Nia asked. Zane interrupted every few lines with questions. Why is the moon sleepy? Does the cow really jump? Russ laughed. Maybe in dreams, buddy. When they finally drifted to sleep, he closed the book gently. Anne stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching quietly. "You're learning," she said. He smiled faintly. "They're teaching me." She nodded. "Children do that. They remind us what matters." As he left that night, he looked back once more, at the warm glow of the apartment window, at the silhouettes of his children asleep inside, and realized something profound. For years he had built towers that touched the sky, but this was the first foundation that felt unshakable. Weeks turned into months. The rhythm of life shifted quietly. Russ no longer lived in headlines. He lived in moments, in laughter, in Saturday soccer games, in helping Zane with homework and braiding Nia's hair, terribly, but with effort. Anne noticed the change. It wasn't sudden but steady, like sunlight returning after a long winter. He no longer tried to prove anything. He listened more than he spoke. When the twins made mistakes he didn't correct with lectures, he guided with patience. One afternoon, at the park where they first reunited, Nia climbed into his lap holding a drawing. It showed a tall building and 4 stick figures beneath it. "That's your office?" he asked, smiling. She shook her head. "No, that's our home." He stared at it, silent for a long moment. "It's beautiful." Zane ran over, holding a small soccer ball. "Daddy, come play!" Russ set the drawing aside and joined him, laughter echoing across the grass. Anne watched from a distance, a quiet smile forming. She didn't know where this road would lead, whether forgiveness could ever turn back time, but she knew one thing: they were healing. And healing, she realized, was louder than pain. As the sun dipped low, Russ stood beside her, watching the twins chase each other. "Thank you for letting me try," he said softly. Anne looked at him, her tone calm. "It's not about letting you, it's about them knowing love, from both of us." He nodded, humbled. "Then I'll keep showing up." She smiled faintly. That's all they need. For the first time in years, peace felt real. Not like a dream, but like a promise finally being kept. The first Sunday morning felt like standing on unfamiliar soil. Russ had worn the wrong shoes, polished black leather with no grip for the polished wooden floors of New Life Worship Center. Still, he showed up, half nervous, half hopeful, fully determined. When he walked into the sanctuary, heads turned, not in judgment but curiosity. What was a corporate giant doing here, standing awkwardly among the tenors, holding a hymnal upside down? Pastor Elijah gave him a warm nod. The choir director, Sister Mabel, a woman with a voice that could make marble weep, cleared her throat and said, "We rehearse with our hearts first, Mr. Morgan. Don't worry about your voice, just bring your sincerity." Russ chuckled nervously. "That I can promise." He wasn't good. In fact, he was borderline tone-deaf, but every Sunday he returned. Anne noticed him standing there, off-beat, off-key, but never absent. And that spoke louder than his vocals ever could. 2 weeks later, Anne found him rolling up his sleeves at the back of the church's community outreach center. The air smelled of fresh produce and cardboard. Russ, who used to sign million-dollar contracts without blinking, now fumbled with canned goods and paper inventory sheets. He looked up, wiping sweat off his brow. "They needed help restocking. I figured I could be useful." "You sure about that?" she said, only half joking. He laughed. "I'm learning to be." She didn't smile, not yet, but she didn't walk away either. By the 3rd week, Russ was assisting families with groceries, delivering packages to shut-ins, and even organizing a toy drive. The community began to see him as more than just that man from the gala. He was becoming someone who showed up. And to Anne, that meant something. One Friday evening, the twins invited him over. Anne hesitated, but she relented after Nia whispered, "Mommy, he tried to sing our bedtime song last night. Let him try the cooking this time." In her small but cozy kitchen, Russ struggled with spaghetti. He overboiled the noodles, added too much oregano, and dropped a wooden spoon. But when Nia said, "It's just like Mommy's," Anne chuckled under her breath. Later he sat with Zane at the table, helping him with fractions. "You sure about this one?" Zane asked. Russ peered at the worksheet. Honestly, no. But we'll figure it out together. Anne watched from the doorway. The man who once walked away from his responsibilities now sat cross-legged on the floor, playing board games and laughing over kitchen disasters. Something in her chest softened, slowly, cautiously. It wasn't one moment, it was hundreds. The missed calls he didn't push about. The school events he attended without asking for credit. The way he sat beside her in church, not to be seen but to support. Anne began to notice the way the twins looked at him now, not with confusion, but trust. And late one evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, she handed him a dish rag and said quietly, "You're not the same man who left." He looked at her, eyes clear. "I've had to meet myself again, Anne, and it was hard, but I want to keep becoming someone you and the kids can be proud of." She didn't answer right away.